So can we just agree to cancel hurricane season this year? Asking for a friend. There's no need to panic just because hurricane season is like 2 weeks away. But we are going to have to do things a little differently this time around because, there's a pandemic going on. How are people supposed to social distance from each other inside a crowded hurricane shelter? How are people supposed to pay for gas and a hotel room to evacuate when they just lost their jobs? Let's see how the government is preparing for COVID-19 meets hurricane season 2020 and how you should be prepping too. Let's see what's brewing. Hello, I'm Jenna Bourne, and I'm an investigative reporter with 10 Tampa Bay. If you're new here, welcome to our caffeine-fueled homemade deep dive into the issues affecting you during the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's start by talking to meteorologist Rick Kirby.
What are we expecting for hurricane season 2020?
Jenna, it's expected to be an active season.
Well, that's not ideal. Colorado State University is predicting 2020 will bring 16 named storms, 8 hurricanes, 4 of which could become major hurricanes. That's about the same as last year.
We have warmer than typical waters in the Gulf and in the Atlantic. That was the case in March and again in April. So that's kind of the fuel for hurricanes.
To take a deep dive into how governments are preparing for Corona, I wanted to bring in the big guns. So I talked to former FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate.
You have decades of experience in emergency management, but planning for a hurricane during a pandemic, have you ever experienced anything like that?
We've looked at disease outbreaks, shelter operations, so this is not something that hasn't been thought about. But one of the challenges is with COVID-19 is because there is no vaccination, it will be a challenge to maintain social distancing while you're doing evacuation and shelter operations.
This is something local governments in Tampa Bay are already planning for.
We're looking at trying to possibly increase that square footage of a person would have inside of a shelter with those social distancing concerns.
Normally, Hillsborough County assigns about 15 square feet per person inside a hurricane shelter. But now, to allow social distancing, they figure they'll need 40 or even 50 square feet for each person.
We're going to be concerned about everyone who comes into the shelter, and we're going to make an attempt to screen them. We'll take their temperature, we'll ask them a few questions. If we have a positive patient, we would put the surgical mask on the positive guest.
Plus, they're looking to open more shelters to keep individual shelter populations low. Hillsborough County is looking to add more schools and empty hotel rooms. And Chief Dennis Jones, who you just heard from, says Hillsborough plans to turn the Yuengling Center, which used to be called the USF Sundome, into a shelter for people with special needs and who need medical support. About 350,000 Floridians stayed in shelters during and after Hurricane Irma. And with the pandemic hurting people financially, that number could be even larger if a hurricane heads our way this year.
We may have even more demand for shelters just because people can't afford to evacuate to a hotel or motel. We may need to look at more transportation support because people may not be able to afford gas.
In the past, the Florida Division of Emergency Management has chartered buses to help people evacuate, but that might not be the best idea this year.
Well, are we going to load people into buses, 50, 60 people at a time? Again, that might change depending on when the storm happens. If we're looking at a June, July storm that we had to provide transportation, we might reach out to a company like Uber and say, hey, listen, you have 5,000, 6,000 Uber drivers. We want to evacuate people car by car by car rather than putting 50 or 60 people in a bus on top of each other.
Normally when a hurricane hits, Florida relies on not just equipment from other states, but thousands of volunteers from other states. But this year, we just can't rely on volunteers wanting to travel during a pandemic. So instead of volunteers, the State Division of Emergency Management Director says we could turn to hiring teachers, state employees, and people who might be unemployed or furloughed instead. All of those changes add up to a much more expensive hurricane season for local governments.
Is there enough funding for governments to be able to do this right?
Well, if we did this solely by local and state government, probably not. But the big partner here will be FEMA and the support FEMA gives to states for protective measures.
So how should you and your family prepare for this unique hurricane season? Normally, experts suggest that you have 3 days of food and water on hand, but this time around, you might want to stretch that out to a week's worth just in case. Look, I'm not an emergency management expert, but I am a native Floridian. And I can tell you right now, you do not have to run out and buy cases of bottled water. If a hurricane's headed my way, I go to my kitchen cabinets. I look for any large containers I can find, and I start filling those up with drinking water.
Have your flashlight, your extra batteries.
You should probably throw some masks and gloves in there too. Check out our hurricane headquarters at 10tampabay.com/tropics.
All kinds of things to help you get your kit together, but also know your evacuation zone.
You want to make sure you have enough supplies for your pets too. During Hurricanes Irma and Matthew, I kept these little containers for food and water, plus an empty disposable baking dish for litter inside the carriers, just in case we needed to evacuate, so Maggie and Mocha would be ready to go. If there's a topic you think What's Brewing should look into, send us a tip at turn10@WTSP.com. Stick around for more homemade deep dives into COVID-19 from What's Brewing. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss an episode, and I'll see you next week. Should people subscribe? Tell me what you think.